Whisper to the Dead, Part 2. Marco's body slammed onto cold, damp ground. For several long moments, he couldn't breathe. The air was thick and carried the suffocating smell of wet soil, decaying wood, and something far older than death itself. When the dizziness finally faded, he reached into his pocket and found his flashlight. His trembling thumb pressed the switch. Click. A weak beam of light pierced the darkness. Marco wished it hadn't. He was standing inside an enormous underground cavern. Its ceiling disappeared into darkness far above him. Its walls were not made of stone. They were built from coffins. Thousands upon thousands of coffins. Old wooden coffins blackened with age. Iron coffins covered in rust. Tiny coffins meant for children. Massive ones, large enough to hold giants. They stretched from the cavern floor to the unseen ceiling, stacked upon one another like the walls of a forgotten city. Every few seconds, one of them knocked. Knock. Then another. Knock. Knock. Soon the entire cavern echoed with countless slow knocks. Not loud, not frantic, patient. As though those inside knew they had all the time in the world. Marco slowly backed away. His flashlight swept across the endless walls. Many of the coffins were chained shut. Others were cracked open, just enough for skeletal fingers to protrude through the gaps. Some seemed to breathe. Others trembled gently. Then he noticed something carved into the nearest coffin. A name. Not the name of the person buried inside, but a confession. I betrayed my brother. The next coffin bore another. I wished my child had never been born. Another. I killed for gold. Every coffin carried a secret. Some only a few words. Others covered with entire paragraphs scratched into the wood. Marco realized what he was seeing. These weren't graves. They were prisons, each one sealed by a whispered confession. A slow applause echoed through the cavern. One pair of hands, then another, then silence. The listener emerged from the darkness. Its towering figure drifted across the ground without making a sound. The countless ears covering its face quivered together. You see them now. Marco couldn't answer. His throat had gone dry. The listener gestured toward the endless walls. Every whispered secret has weight. When sorrow is spoken into the ear of the dead, it cannot simply disappear. It must go somewhere. Marco looked around the cavern. You keep them here? The creature smiled. I keep what people are too afraid to carry. But why? Marco shouted. Why do you want our secrets? The listener tilted its head. I do not create guilt. I do not create lies. You do. I simply feed on what humanity buries. Its voice remained calm. Every secret whispered into a corpse strengthens this place. Every confession builds another coffin. Marco stared at the endless walls. There were far too many. Centuries. Perhaps thousands of years worth. Then, a soft voice interrupted the silence. Kuya. Marco froze. He recognized that voice. Slowly, he turned. A small wooden coffin had opened by only a few inches. A little hand reached out. It was Junjun, the missing boy. His face appeared through the narrow opening. His skin was pale. His eyes were filled with tears. Please, don't leave us here. Marco rushed toward him. He grabbed the lid and tried to force it open. It wouldn't move, no matter how hard he pulled. The chains refused to break. Hold on, I'm getting you out. Junjun shook his head. You can't. The coffin isn't locked. Marco stopped pulling. What do you mean? The little boy lowered his eyes. It's closed, because I still have a secret. Before Marco could ask another question, Long strands of black hair suddenly burst from inside the coffin. They wrapped around Junjun's mouth, dragging him backward into the darkness. His terrified eyes never left Marco. The lid slammed shut. The knocking immediately resumed. Knock, knock, knock. Marco pounded on the wood. Junjun. No answer. Only the endless echo of knocking throughout the cavern. The listener spoke again. You cannot save those who still cling to what they refuse to release. Marco turned toward the creature. There has to be another way. There is. Hope flickered inside him. What is it? The listener's countless ears trembled. Tell me your oldest secret. Marco felt his heart sink. The drowning, the lie, the guilt he had hidden since childhood. The listener took another step closer. Speak it, and you will never feel its weight again. Marco closed his eyes. For a moment, the offer was tempting. To live without guilt, without regret, without pain. But then he remembered the priest's warning. Never whisper back. He slowly opened his eyes. No. The listener's smile disappeared. The cavern fell deathly silent. Every knock stopped. Every coffin became still. The creature's voice grew colder than the grave. Then you will carry it forever, until it buries you. At that moment, a blinding light suddenly pierced the darkness. Someone was praying. Somewhere above, the ancient words echoed faintly through the cavern. The listener looked upward. For the first time, its expression changed. Not anger, not fear. Recognition. The Guardian. It whispered, and the entire underground kingdom began to shake. The cavern shook violently. Dust rained from the unseen ceiling. The walls of coffins groaned, as though the entire underground kingdom had awakened. The knocking began again. Not one coffin, not 100. Every coffin. Thousands of hollow knocks echoed together until the sound became almost unbearable. Knock, knock, knock. The listener slowly raised its head. The Guardian has returned. For the first time, Marco heard uncertainty in the creature's voice. Far above them, a warm golden light appeared. At first, it looked no larger than a candle flame. Then it grew brighter, larger. The light spilled through the darkness like sunrise breaking into a world that had forgotten the sun. Ancient prayers echoed through the cavern, steady, unshaken. The listener stepped backward. Its countless ears twitched violently. No, it whispered. He should have died long ago. The beam of light struck the cavern floor. Standing within it was the elderly priest. Behind him came Mang Nestor and Aling Sabel, each carrying a lantern blessed inside the chapel before dawn. The priest's voice rang through the underground kingdom. Marco, I'm here. Marco shouted back. The old priest hurried toward him, but before he could reach him, the listener raised one skeletal hand. The shadows themselves rose from the ground. They twisted together like black smoke. Within seconds, towering figures formed from darkness surrounded the rescuers. They had no faces, only ears. Hundreds of ears covering smooth heads. Every one of them whispered at once, "Leave. This place belongs to forgotten voices." Mang Nestor tightened his grip on his shovel. Without hesitation, he swung it at the nearest shadow. The blessed steel passed straight through the darkness. The figure dissolved into black mist. Another immediately took its place. "There are too many," he shouted. The priest continued praying. His voice never wavered. Each verse pushed the shadows farther back, not destroying them, only forcing them away. "They're buying us time," Aling Sabel cried. "Marco, run." Marco started toward them, but something wrapped around his ankle. He looked down. A pale hand had emerged from the ground, then another, then dozens more. Hands reached from beneath the soil, clutching desperately at his legs, not trying to hurt him, trying to stop him. The listener watched silently. They don't want you to leave. Marco struggled against the grasping fingers. Let me go. One hand loosened just enough for an old woman's voice to escape. Please. We forgot our names. Another whispered. Don't leave us alone. Another. Tell someone we were here. Marco realized these weren't monsters. They were souls trapped by the weight of secrets they had carried into death. His heart broke. The priest finally reached him. He pressed a small silver cross into Marco's hand. Listen to me carefully. There isn't much time. Marco looked into the old man's tired eyes. What is this place? The priest took a deep breath. This kingdom existed long before our village, long before the first church, long before history remembered these lands. The elders spoke of a being that could hear every hidden truth. They called it the Listener. It never forced anyone to surrender their secrets. It simply waited, and grief always came willingly. The Whispers built this place. The priest gestured toward the endless walls of coffins. Every confession whispered into the ear of the dead became another stone in its kingdom. Every regret became another prison. And over centuries, this cavern grew beneath the earth. Marco stared at the impossible city surrounding them. So this whole place was built by human sorrow. The priest nodded. By guilt, by lies, by promises spoken too late. The listener began walking toward them, slowly, gracefully, as though it knew there was nowhere they could escape. You blame me, it said, but I never created your pain. I only listened. Its countless ears trembled gently. You brought every secret here. You fed me. You built my kingdom. Its voice echoed across the cavern. I am only the mirror of humanity. Marco lowered his head. For a moment, he couldn't deny the truth. Every coffin surrounding him existed because someone believed it was easier to whisper a secret to the dead than to face the living. The listener had survived because people continued choosing silence over truth. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the cavern. Everyone looked up. A massive section of the ceiling had begun collapsing. Huge stones crashed onto the walls of coffins. Wood splintered. Chains snapped. Thousands of voices screamed together. The ancient kingdom was falling apart. The priest grabbed Marco's arm. We have to leave. But the others? Marco looked toward the countless coffins. Toward Junjun. Toward the forgotten souls. The priest's face filled with sorrow. If this place falls, their prison falls with it. It is the only chance they'll ever have. The listener stretched out one long hand. Its voice was no longer calm. If you leave, you will carry your secret forever. Marco tightened his grip on the silver cross. He looked directly at the ancient creature. No, I'll carry it, but I won't feed it to you. For the first time in centuries, the listener looked truly afraid. The cavern shook harder. The walls of coffins began collapsing like dominoes. Thousands of whispered confessions rose into the air like invisible winds. The ancient kingdom was coming undone, and somewhere deep beneath the falling stone, something far older than the listener let out a slow, ancient breath. The underground kingdom was collapsing. Massive slabs of stone crashed from the ceiling. Walls of ancient coffins toppled one after another, filling the cavern with clouds of dust and splintered wood. Thousands of whispers echoed through the darkness. Some cried, some begged, Some laughed, others simply repeated the same words over and over. Remember, remember, remember. Marco covered his ears, but the voices were no longer outside him. They were inside his mind. The priest grabbed Marco by the arm. We have to go, now. Mung Nestor and Aling Sibel were already running toward the narrow tunnel that led back to the surface. Behind them, the listener remained perfectly still. It made no attempt to chase them. Instead, it watched. Its countless ears trembled, as if listening to something far beyond human hearing. Then, for the first time, the creature smiled. You cannot escape. You are only running toward the truth. The tunnel shook violently. Roots burst through the ceiling. Loose rocks rolled beneath their feet. The deeper they climbed, the heavier Marco's head became. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded behind his eyes. He stumbled. Images flashed across his mind. Not dreams, not imagination. Memories. A rainy night. A tiny wooden house. His grandfather, Mang Isko, holding him tightly in his arms. His mother crying. His father shouting. And outside, a crowd of frightened villagers carrying burning torches. Please, his mother sobbed. Don't take my son. An elderly woman stood in the doorway. It was the same mysterious woman dressed in black. Only now, she looked much younger. She stared directly at little Marco, then whispered, He has already been chosen. Marco gasped. The vision disappeared. He nearly collapsed. The priest caught him before he could fall. What did you see? Marco struggled to breathe. I've seen her before. The old woman. When I was a child, the priest closed his eyes. I feared this day would come. What aren't you telling me? Marco demanded. The old priest hesitated. Finally, he spoke. 20 years ago, your family came to this village seeking refuge. You were only 5 years old. There had already been disappearances. People claimed they heard whispers from empty graves. Children spoke to invisible voices. Then, you vanished. Marco's heartbeat thundered in his chest. I was missing? The priest nodded. For 3 days, the entire village searched for you. They found you. His voice broke. Inside the nameless graveyard, Marco felt the world spin around him. What happened? No one knows. You never spoke about those 3 days. You returned home. But after that, the whispers became stronger. Another violent tremor shook the tunnel. The listener's voice echoed from deep below. You still refuse to tell him. The priest ignored it. He continued climbing, but Marco stopped. No, I'm done running. I want the truth. The tunnel fell silent. Even the collapsing cavern seemed to pause. Then, the listener's voice came again. Soft, patient, almost kind. Ask him, who carried you out of the grave? Marco slowly turned toward the priest. The old man's hands were shaking. Father, who found me? The priest couldn't answer. His silence spoke louder than words. Aling Sibel stepped forward. Tears filled her eyes. It wasn't the search party. Marco stared at her. It wasn't your parents. It wasn't the villagers. She swallowed hard. It was Mang Isko. The memory struck Marco like lightning. He saw it clearly now. His grandfather walking alone through the forest, calling his name, finding a tiny grave that had never existed before, digging with his bare hands, pulling a frightened little boy from beneath the earth, holding him tightly, whispering, I've got you. We're going home. Marco slowly looked down at his trembling hands. I remember, he whispered, but his voice cracked. There was someone else, someone standing behind his grandfather, watching, smiling. The listener, only smaller, weaker. Its face was hidden beneath a black funeral veil, and before Marco lost consciousness, it leaned close to his ear and whispered something he could never remember. Until now. Marco's eyes widened in horror. No. The forgotten words echoed inside his mind. If they ever remember, you'll come back to me. The tunnel trembled again. The listener laughed. A deep, ancient, patient laugh that shook the earth itself. Now, you remember the promise. The priest stepped between Marco and the darkness. You lied to him. The listener answered calmly. No, I waited. I always wait. Far below them, the underground kingdom let out one final thunderous roar. Then the earth split open. An enormous crack raced toward the tunnel. The priest looked at Marco with desperate urgency. We have only one chance left. If we don't seal the nameless graveyard before sunset, the listener will never be imprisoned again. Marco looked back into the darkness. The creature's countless ears were all turned toward him, listening, waiting, smiling, and Marco realized something that chilled him more than anything he had seen so far. The listener had never wanted to kill him. It had spent 20 years waiting for him to remember. Marco, the priest, Mang Nestor, and Elling Sibel barely escaped the collapsing tunnel. The moment they emerged from the forest, the ground behind them caved in with a deafening roar. Dust billowed into the evening sky. For several seconds, no one spoke. The entrance to the listener's underground kingdom had vanished beneath tons of earth. Marco stared at the collapsed hillside. Is it over? The priest did not answer. He simply looked toward the village. A heavy silence hung over the valley. There were no barking dogs, no children playing, no smoke rising from cooking fires. Only stillness. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm. They hurried back along the narrow dirt road. As the first houses came into view, Marco felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Every front door stood open. Every window was wide. But the village was empty. Not a single soul walked the streets. But even the chapel stood abandoned. Only one sound drifted through the evening air. Whispering, hundreds of voices, soft, constant, calling from somewhere beyond the houses. The four of them followed the sound. It led them to the village plaza. Marco stopped dead in his tracks. Every villager was there. Men, women, children, the elderly, even those too sick to walk. They stood in perfect silence, forming a wide circle. In the center rested a single wooden coffin. It was closed, unmarked. No flowers, no cross, no name. Just an empty coffin waiting beneath the darkening sky. The villagers slowly turned toward Marco. Every face wore the same peaceful smile. Every pair of eyes looked strangely distant, as if they were dreaming while still awake. Then, together, they whispered, "You're finally home." Marco's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't theirs. It was the listener's, speaking through every mouth at once. The priest stepped forward. "Everyone, wake up. This isn't your voice." No one answered. Instead, an elderly woman calmly approached the coffin. She leaned down, placed her lips near the empty space where a body's ear should have been, and whispered. The instant she finished, a faint black mist drifted from her mouth. It floated into the coffin. Then she stepped back, smiling. Another villager took her place. Then another. Then another. One by one, each person offered a whispered confession. "I stole from my own brother. I hated my father. I wished my wife would die. I abandoned my child." Secrets, regrets, sins buried for decades. Each confession became another stream of black mist. The empty coffin slowly filled with darkness. Marco finally understood. The coffin didn't need a corpse. It had become a vessel, a place where every whispered secret gathered. The priest gripped his crucifix tightly. If the coffin fills, the listener will no longer be bound to the graveyard. It will be free to go wherever whispered guilt exists. Mang Nestor stepped forward, raising his shovel. We have to destroy it. He swung with all his strength. The shovel struck the side of the coffin. Crack! A deep fracture spread across the wood, but instead of breaking, the coffin screamed. A horrifying human scream echoed across the plaza. Every villager instantly stopped whispering. Slowly, they all turned toward Mang Nestor. Their smiles vanished. Their eyes became completely black. Without a word, they began walking toward him. Run, the priest shouted, but Mang Nestor stood his ground. He raised his shovel again. Before he could strike, dozens of muddy hands burst from beneath the plaza. They seized his legs, his arms, his waist, dragging him downward. Marco lunged forward. Mang Nestor! The old gravedigger looked at him one last time. His face remained calm. Don't whisper. The earth swallowed him whole. The muddy hands disappeared. Only his shovel remained, standing upright in the ground. The villagers resumed their slow march toward the coffin. Only a handful remained. The listener's voice echoed through every one of them. One final secret, one final whisper, and I shall walk beneath the sun once more. The sky darkened unnaturally. Clouds twisted overhead. The wind carried the smell of damp graves. Church bells rang wildly without human hands. Dogs howled from every direction. The priest looked at Marco. His expression was filled with sorrow. It has all led to this. Marco stared at the empty coffin. He suddenly understood why the listener had waited 20 years. It wasn't waiting for a sacrifice. It was waiting for his confession. Because the oldest secret, the deepest wound, the one secret Marco had never spoken aloud, was powerful enough to complete the ritual. Far away, from somewhere beneath the earth, the listener whispered only one sentence, softly, patiently, as though it had all the time in the world. Come and tell me the truth. Marco slowly took a step toward the coffin, not because he wanted to, but because something inside him was answering the call. Marco stood motionless before the empty coffin. Every step he had taken felt as though it had never truly been his own. The whisper inside his mind grew louder. Come closer. Tell me your secret. Set yourself free. The black mist swirling inside the coffin pulsed like a living heart. Each beat echoed across the silent village. Around it stood every resident, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching Marco, waiting. The elderly priest stepped between Marco and the coffin. You don't owe it your truth. The listener laughed through the mouths of the villagers, but he does. You've carried it long enough. The priest gripped his silver crucifix. A confession only has power when it is freely given. The smiles on the villagers' faces widened. He came here willingly. Marco closed his eyes. The memories returned. The river, the storm, his cousin, Junjun. They had been children, playing near the flooded riverbank after days of heavy rain. Marco had dared Junjun to step onto an old fallen tree stretching across the rushing water. It'll be fun. I'll be right behind you. Junjun smiled and took the first step. Then the log shifted. Marco still remembered the terrified scream. The splash. The desperate hand reaching toward him. Marco had frozen. He had been too frightened to move. By the time adults arrived, the river had already carried Junjun away. His body was found days later. No one blamed Marco. Everyone believed it had been a tragic accident. But Marco had blamed himself every single day since. He had never told anyone the truth, not even his grandfather, not even the priest. The listener's voice softened. You see, you've been whispering that guilt to yourself for 20 years. You've already confessed, just not aloud. The black mist inside the coffin grew darker, its edges stretched upward like reaching fingers. Marco looked toward the priest. What if I tell everyone? The priest shook his head. That isn't what it wants. It doesn't seek honesty. It feeds on despair. If you surrender your secret to it, it becomes part of its kingdom forever. The villagers slowly began walking toward Marco, not aggressively, almost gently, like sleepwalkers. Together they whispered, "Tell us, tell us, tell us." Their voices blended into one impossible chorus. Suddenly, Aling Sabel stepped forward. Tears streamed down her weathered face. She looked directly at Marco. Then, with surprising strength, she slapped him across the face. The sharp sound echoed through the plaza. Marco blinked in shock. "Listen to me," she cried. "The dead don't need your confession. The living do." Her words pierced through the endless whispers. The people you love, they deserve your truth, not that thing. For the first time, the whispers stopped. The listener fell silent. Its influence weakened for only a heartbeat. The priest understood immediately. Marco, it cannot steal what is freely shared among the living. Secrets lose their power over it once they are spoken to those who can forgive. Marco's heart pounded. He slowly turned away from the coffin. He faced the villagers instead. Many of them were still trapped under the listener's control. But behind those empty eyes, he could still see fragments of the people they truly were. He took a deep breath. His voice trembled. "When I was a child, I caused Junjun's death. The village became perfectly still." Marco continued. "I dared him to cross the river. I was too afraid to save him. I have lived with that guilt every day of my life." Tears streamed down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The moment the words left his lips, the black mist surrounding the coffin shuddered violently. It didn't flow toward the coffin. Instead, it dissolved into the evening air. The listener screamed, a terrible sound unlike anything human. The villagers clutched their heads. One by one, their black eyes faded. Their own voices returned. Some collapsed to their knees. Others began crying without understanding why. The spell was breaking. The empty coffin shook violently. Cracks spread across its sides. From deep beneath the earth came the furious roar of the listener. "You belong to me. You promised." Marco stood his ground. "I never promised you. I only feared the truth. And I'm done being afraid." The coffin exploded. Dark mist burst into the sky. It twisted together above the village, slowly taking the shape of the listener itself. Its towering form rose over the rooftops. Its countless ears twitched wildly. Its endless mouth opened in rage. The villagers looked up in horror. The priest tightened his grip on the cross. He whispered, "It's finally here." The final battle had begun. The listener towered above the village. Its body was formed from black mist, wet earth, and countless whispering voices. Its face was still covered with hundreds of human ears. Every ear trembled. Every ear listened. Every ear searched for one more secret. The wind died. The stars disappeared behind thick black clouds. Even the moon seemed to hide from what had risen from the earth. The villagers fell to their knees. Some covered their ears. Others cried. Many could do nothing but stare in terror. The listener looked down at Marco. Its voice rolled across the village like distant thunder. You have weakened me, but you cannot destroy me. As long as people fear the truth, they will always whisper to the dead. Marco stood in the center of the plaza. His fear remained, but it no longer controlled him. He finally understood. The listener had never been feeding on corpses. It fed on silence, on guilt, on secrets buried inside human hearts. The elderly priest stepped beside Marco. For centuries, we fought the wrong battle. We tried to seal graves. We blessed coffins. We guarded cemeteries, but the true prison. He looked toward the frightened villagers. Was never underground. It was inside us. The listener roared. Thousands of whispers exploded from its body. The voices of fathers, mothers, children, friends, people long dead. Every voice begged for forgiveness. Every voice confessed forgotten sins. The terrible chorus filled the night. Several villagers collapsed as memories they had buried for years returned all at once. The listener spread its enormous arms. Black mist rushed toward every house in the village, toward every frightened person, toward every hidden regret. Its strength began returning. Marco realized the truth. It wasn't stealing secrets anymore. People were surrendering them out of fear. The more they panicked, the stronger it became. Marco climbed onto the broken platform beside the empty coffin. Listen to me, he shouted. His voice echoed through the square. The villagers slowly looked toward him. We've spent our lives hiding from the truth. We thought secrets disappeared if we buried them. They don't. They only grow. And that's how this thing survived. He pointed at the listener. It only has power when we feed it with silence. An old farmer stepped forward first. Tears filled his eyes. I lied to my family for years. I lost our land through gambling. I blamed someone else. His wife embraced him instead of anger. She cried with him. The black mist surrounding the listener faded slightly. Another villager spoke. A young mother admitted that she had abandoned her own sister when they were children. An elderly man confessed that he had stolen from his best friend decades earlier. A woman admitted she had never forgiven herself for failing to save her child during a flood. One by one, the villagers shared their truths, not with the dead, with each other. Every confession was answered with tears, with forgiveness, or with honest grief. But none of the whispers entered the listener. Instead, they vanished into the night like smoke carried away by the wind. The listener screamed, "No, they belong to me." Its body began breaking apart. The countless ears covering its face shriveled one by one. The whispers faded into silence. Its towering form grew smaller, weaker, less certain. Marco stepped forward. You waited centuries for people to fear the truth. He held the silver cross tightly. But fear ends tonight. The listener looked at him with what almost seemed like sadness. I only listened, it whispered. Marco nodded. I know, but we're done whispering. The ancient creature slowly looked around the village. No one hid anymore. Families embraced. Friends wept together. Long-buried truths were finally spoken beneath the open sky instead of into silent coffins. For the first time in centuries, there were no whispers for the listener to hear. Only honest voices. Only the living. The creature's body dissolved into drifting ash. Its countless ears crumbled into dust. Its final words were barely audible. If no one whispers, I cannot remain. The wind carried the last traces of its voice into the darkness. Then, it was gone. Dawn broke over the village. Golden sunlight washed across the rooftops. The heavy silence had disappeared. Birds sang once more. Dogs barked happily through the streets. Children laughed again. For the first time in many years, the village felt alive. The old priest smiled. The curse is over. Marco quietly looked toward the distant forest, where the nameless graveyard had once stood. Only wild grass remained, as though it had never existed. 5 years later, the story slowly became nothing more than an old legend. Parents still warned their children, never whisper into the ear of the dead. Most believed it was only another superstition. Only Marco knew the truth. One rainy evening, he attended the funeral of an elderly neighbor. As the mourners quietly prayed, he noticed a little boy walking toward the coffin. The child leaned close to the deceased's ear. Marco quickly placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. The child looked up. "What were you going to say?" Marco smiled softly. "If you have something to tell someone." He looked toward the family gathered around the coffin. "Tell the living while they're still here to hear it." The boy nodded. He stepped away from the coffin. Instead, he walked to his mother, wrapped his arms around her, and whispered, "I love you." Marco smiled. Outside, the rain slowly stopped. A warm breeze drifted through the open windows. No whisper answered, only silence. Peaceful. At last, the end.